Welcome to Heartline, conversations with healthcare changemakers following their heartline. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Austin. I'm an emergency medicine physician, coach, and educator. I believe that healthcare needs to improve the quality care that patients receive, and that supporting the workers is at the heart of this transformation. I'm thrilled today to have Dr. Stephanie Pearson on the podcast. I met her at the Women in Medicine Summits, which is a fantastic conference in Chicago. And I was just really moved by her personal story of how she is doing amazing change-making work for physicians. So, Stephanie, I'm going to let you share your story with the audience. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, hi. Thank you for having me. I am an OBGYN by training, and unfortunately, my career came to an end. I was kicked in the shoulder during a difficult patient delivery, and she just got me in the right spot. I ended up with a torn labrum. My first orthopedist really dismissed my concerns and in not so nice language told me that professional baseball pitchers pitched with torn labrums, so I should be able to do my job. And so I did. I put my head down and I figured out how to compensate until I could no longer compensate, and eventually was found to have a frozen shoulder. My next orthopedist said he'd have me back to work in 12 weeks after surgery, and that was a little over 11 years ago. I have considerable range of motion deficits and nerve damage in my left arm. I was never cleared to do OB or operate, and he went as far as to put in my notes that I'm a liability. And I found out later that there was a precedented legal case where an orthopedist allowed a gynecologist to go back to work after a similar injury. The OBGYN ended up getting sued for something, and the orthopedist was brought into the suit. So there was a little bit of covering himself. I had enough time to realize he probably did do me a favor, though. I probably would have really pushed myself, and who knows, I may have ended up in a litigious situation. But I learned a lot the hard way about disability and life insurance. And after doing several other things, I ended up starting an insurance brokerage firm, realizing that I had not been properly educated, that I really wasn't serviced appropriately. And I felt like I couldn't be the only physician who felt taken advantage of. And so while I'm not quite the healthcare change maker that you're used to having on the show, I like to think that my change making is more in helping the physician rather than helping, obviously, our patients, because I'm not there anymore. But I have definitely found a new passion and fulfillment in being able to educate and still live a life of service.
Wow. I'm just listening to this story and my brain is going in a million directions. I think where I want to spend a little bit of time is going back 11 years and how did you grapple with essentially losing your specialty, that you couldn't do that? Like, what did that time look like? How did you get support? What did you do?
So admittedly, it was more than just losing my profession. Without sounding trite, I lost my identity. It was not pretty in the beginning. Let's see, I was literally going to intensive therapy every other day to keep me off the roof. I wrote letters to my children and to my husband. I was suicidal. I thought that I was better off dead than alive and unable to practice. Part of that because I was taken advantage of. I was grossly overfunded for life insurance and underfunded for disability insurance. And, looking back now, of course, I'm glad that I'm still here, but it was a lot of therapy and pharmacology and the support of my husband. I share a story. He brought home a puppy, and I thought it was the meanest thing ever. I hated him. And he said, look, the boys and I are clearly not enough to get you out of bed. My boys were 4 and 6 at the time. And he said, you have a choice. You can be surrounded by filth, or you can get out of bed and start taking care of something again. And I didn't want to be surrounded by dog filth. And so I found myself at the dog park every day. And I was Kim's mom. No one knew me as Dr. Pearson. Most people forget to even ask people's names. Everyone knows all the dogs' names, right?
Right.
And so it allowed me that space where people didn't know me as Dr. Pearson. And that was something that I really had to allow myself to experience, because at the time I was like, oh my God, if I'm not Dr. Pearson, who am I? And, I remember my 6-year-old at the time getting asked, oh, what does your mom do? And he said, she used to be a doctor. And I was reduced to tears, right? Mm-hmm. So part of it was allowing myself to grieve. I think that a lot of times people think that death is the only thing that people grieve, or at least that was honestly my understanding even at the time. And it seemed silly, and that's not the right word, but to be grieving what I was. But in actuality, we have to do that, right? We have to allow ourselves the space to grieve the life that we thought we were going to have and what our big plans were, and that life doesn't always work out that way. So I went through a long period of grieving with a lot of help. I felt alone and really kind of started seeking out a community. And I knew that I wasn't the only physician who had been through this. And I ended up starting my own community on Facebook. And it's grown exponentially over the years. And so I realized that, I should not, I shouldn't be suffering in silence. I believe there's a tyranny of perfection that exists in medicine. And I really wanted to break that cycle. And so I couldn't find a community, so I made my own. And that was incredibly helpful, getting the support and guidance of people who had been there before me, and now being able to share my experience with other people going through it is very helpful. Trying to change my definition of what an accomplishment was. And I know you've talked about this before too, that a lot of physicians tie our self-worth to professional accomplishments. And I was one of those people, right? I was the one that people sent hard cases to. I loved the OR. Even now, I would do some pretty awful things probably to be able to get back into the OR, right? But I had to reframe a lot of ideas that I grew up getting told. And that was a work in progress. None of this was done overnight. I leaned into kind of what brought me fulfillment and what other things was I good at, right? And where could I still give back? And I did quite a few things before doing what I'm currently doing. And ultimately, it was that sense of I really feel passionately about education and service. And so what could I do next? Because my brain still worked, right?
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that I was still fulfilling the legacy that I wanted to fill. And I often find myself when I'm speaking to other people in this position of, not losing sight of that, right? How do you really want people to remember you? And what do you think you're supposed to be doing? And I realized that was a really long answer to a short question.
I loved it though. And one of the things I want to go back to, if you're okay with sharing, is, in my book, I talk about how important therapy is. And I honestly think that therapy should be, I want to get to a point in medicine where it's weirder that you haven't seen a therapist than, how it is now, that it's kind of taboo that, you go and you talk to somebody about your feelings. And I'm just curious if you can share like what type of therapy, for me, there was, cognitive based therapy, but what really kind of moved the needle for me was EMDR. So I just kind of like to have that conversation and normalize it if you're willing to share what was helpful.
Andrea, I have no secrets. I started with a psychologist, therapist who focused on major life losses. And I don't know exactly what her title was, but at the time it was the right idea for me. And it was really a lot of talk therapy. It was really getting to that point of allowing me to grieve and like making sure that I felt safe in saying what I wanted to say and how I felt, and really kind of just kind of almost verbal diarrhea. Like I just brain dumped everything on this poor woman, but she was wonderful and really kind of got me over the hump. And then I realized that I probably did need medication. And so I found a psychiatrist who, to this day, I credit him mostly with getting me back to being functional, right? Like my psychologist got me over the hump, and then my psychiatrist kind of got me back is the best way I can describe it. But I also got really lucky, and this is crazy. He is no longer practicing. We're still friends, but he treated physicians only at this stage in his life. But he had actually taken care of my mom when I was younger. And I remembered him. And my mom was a horribly controlled bipolar sufferer. And when I walked into his office the first time, I was like, I know you. And he looked at me and he said, oh my God, you're Sandy's daughter. Mm. And I was like, yeah. And the first time I met him, I was 15. And I actually told him to go F himself because I knew, seriously, I knew that my mom was lying to him. Mm. And I walked out of his office. Fast forward, he ended up firing my mom as a patient, but he knew my entire life. And so it was really easy for me to just kind of hunker down and be like, all right, this guy knows more about me than anyone ever has because he knows how I grew up. And so it was a little bit easier to kind of tap into some of those deeper rooted issues that we talk about, you know, your childhood and your upbringing. And so there was an automatic bond that happened that I wish more people had. And he got me on the right cocktail. And I will tell you, when he retired, it was like the worst week of in a long time. I have since found another psychiatrist, and we do a lot of CBT. I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of, you know, I have my gratitude journal and I have my diary, and, you know, it's just more talking about it, right? And kind of trying to demystify some of the angst that we carry with us when things don't work out the way we want them to. So
Wow.
I am better at living through therapy and pharmacology. I am a huge proponent. I think, like, we're born, we should have a therapist.
Yeah, I totally agree. And listeners of the pod know that I say this sometimes, and it's not to gaslight physicians, but we know how dysfunctional healthcare is right now in medical culture. And I'm finishing up my master's in health professions education. I've just done this qualitative research on change makers in healthcare. And the theoretical underpinning of the work is that organizational change doesn't happen without individual transformation. And I want to say that again for the audience. So there's this organizational theory that essentially all change starts with the individual. You know, that's the Gandhi saying. So we have to undergo these transformations and do this deep work. And then that influences the teams around us. And then that starts to change the organization. And it's not easy and it is slow a lot of the time. But, you know, I kind of look at, you know, I walk around the hospital and I look at the way physicians are talking to each other and the way sometimes we're talking to patients and just the whole milieu. And it's like, this is not normal. Like, this is not the way that, like, other professions conduct themselves. And we often just say, well, it's this, you know, shitty system. And it's like, well, what is the system? It's made of people.
And I will tell you, physicians were initially some of the meanest people. And, you know, I go back to that tyranny of perfection that people would say, but you look normal. And what do you mean you can't do your job? Like, okay, so your shoulder's a little off. Like, really? How hard is it to deliver a baby? And I'm like, okay, so clearly you don't remember your OB rotation. And yeah, could I deliver a baby that just falls out? Sure, but so could my 6-year-old. But if there's a dystocia, if there's a complication, if there's an emergency, I shouldn't be the one there doing it, you know? And so initially it was really hard because I felt like it was my own people that were betraying me. And it wasn't until I found the community of other physicians who, because of injury, illness, had to change the way they practiced or leave medicine, that I started to feel supported. And so to your point of how we speak to each other, we're not even always nice to each other.
Yeah, we're frequently not. You know, I think back to that first orthopedic surgeon that saw you. You know, you think about, you know, my husband and I have this saying that, you know, when you're watching people out in the world and like you see a couple that's like talking very badly to each other, my first thought is always like, if that is what's happening out in public, you know, what's happening at home. And so I think about that with, you know, when we interact with the medical system and, you know, I'm a physician, I have all this training. And when I'm treated poorly, it's like, what does the average person, like, what protection do they have?
But I sometimes wonder if he spoke to me the way he spoke to me because I'm a physician. I'd like to think he doesn't speak to regular patients that way. And I could be wrong. I mean, I really never heard bad things about this guy. And I actually knew him back from when we were both residents.
Wow.
So I kind of think he spoke to me that way because we were colleagues. I think. But to your point, I often find myself wondering how average people navigate the medical system, because there have been plenty of times in the last 11 years that I've had to call in a favor or, you know, make a few phone calls to make things happen and, you know, pull the doctor card, that when people don't have someone in medicine, I don't know how certain things get done.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That was my experience with my father navigating. It was just a complete disaster the last year. I want to switch gears because I want to make sure our audience gets some of the really important information about what you do now. And there was a thread that you said that you were overinsured with life insurance and underinsured with disability. And I admittedly hate this stuff. Like, I literally just want to, surrender it to somebody else. I have my financial planner and, I met with somebody for disability insurance and I hate it. I don't even know where to start. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
No, listen, if you would have told me, even 10 years ago that this would be my life, I would have thought you were nuts. But I did find out the hard way. I was taken advantage of as a young physician and purchased permanent life insurance, which I'm not as anti as a lot of the physician space is, but I think there's a time and a place for it. And it is often not when you're young and raising a family. And so that's where the kind of overinsured in life insurance came from. I was spending way too much money on that product. And I thought I did everything right from the disability front, right? I met with the guy that my senior partner used. And so I was overly trusting, which I also think a lot of young physicians are. And similarly, really didn't know what I didn't know. And so I didn't ask questions and I just assumed, because I want my patients to trust me, that I should be trusting this person. Mm-hmm. And he didn't really sell me what I should have had and didn't keep up with me. And so I ended up not keeping pace with my income. I didn't have the right language in my policy. And so it was kind of an additional hit when I felt like I was already down, when it was like, oh, I thought I did everything the right way, only to come to find out that I didn't. And that was really where that kind of desire to change things came from.
Yeah. So we do have a lot of physicians that listen to the podcast. We have some medical students and residents. Maybe that's a great way to frame some of this conversation. So if you're a medical student out there, should you have disability insurance?
So I am of the ilk that no. If you are a medical student, you are not earning money. No one is dependent on your income because you don't actually have an income yet. Most carriers will limit what they'll let you get as a student anyway. The one caveat to that is if you are a woman and you are thinking about family planning, absolutely you should get it. The reason being that a lot of the disability carriers look for every reason not to cover future pregnancies. And even if you're pregnant, when you apply, they look at it as a pre-existing diagnosis and they won't cover that pregnancy. And pregnancy-related disability claims account for about 6 to 8% of claims every year. So again, I give long answers to short questions, but for the average medical student, I actually don't recommend getting insurance. Residents, different story. The younger you are, the healthier you are, the better off you are getting a policy in place. There are also discounts that are available while you're in training that if you wait until you're in attending, you lose that opportunity. And it really accounts for thousands and thousands of dollars over the lifetime of your policy. And so residency is actually the best time to get a policy. I will often even say between match and starting intern year, because you actually have some free time before, life gets crazy. Absolutely before you finish training. But there are some of us that, again, don't get this education while they're in training. And so if you are an attending and you don't have coverage or you don't know what your coverage is, there's no bad time, right? I mean, better to kind of play catch up and get yourself solidified than kind of put your head in the sand.
Yeah. So hypothetically, if somebody is an independent contractor, there potentially is some ways that their income is structured, their corporation is structured, that can cause some challenges related to getting disability insurance. I see you shaking your head. So maybe could you kind of speak to that situation and what advice you'd have for the independent contractors out there?
So 1099 work is a little bit tricky for a few reasons. Number one, the disability insurance carriers can only cover what we can prove you're making. And so for some people who are coming like right out of training, haven't gotten their disability insurance yet, and now they're doing 1099 work, you might need a year of income before you can get covered. Now, some people have very well-written contracts, and that's not an issue. But for hourly employees where the contract's not specific that you're going to make X dollars this year, it really comes down to your taxes. And this is one of those weird places where if you have a good accountant, they're going to want to make it look like you're not making a lot of money so that you don't have to pay a lot of taxes, right? There's depreciation, there's write-offs, all of that stuff. The problem with that goes back to what I said, we can only cover what we can prove. So whatever you're showing to Uncle Sam is what we can do, which is another reason that we really want people to do this when they're in training before that becomes an issue. There's not a whole lot of magic or recommendations that I can actually give because ultimately you want to do what your accountant thinks is best.
Yeah. Yep. So definitely there's a lot of people that listen that are independent contractors or residents that are going to be going that route. And, my advice on that is having a team and triangulating information, because I think the situation you described is very common. You think you're getting good advice from one person, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. Read stuff on your own, talk to, expertise. I'm learning in this space between a financial planner, a accountant, an attorney. My portfolio of people on my board of directors is large. And, the one thing I'll say for financial planners, think about how you're paying them and how they make money from you. Because if they're making money based on your investments, then there's potentially a conflict of interest versus if you're paying them hourly for financial advice. There's different schools of thoughts on that. But, I think we really do have to spend some time and get smart on these issues.
Agreed. And it's the same thing in the insurance space. There is a difference amongst people who sell these products. There are agents that work for specific carriers, and then they're incentivized to sell that product. And then there are brokers, which is what I am. And I say we're like Switzerland. We're not in bed with any particular carrier. We should be working as true fiduciaries, meaning the client comes first, not the company. And again, you won't know unless you ask, right? But part of the problem is a lot of us don't know the right questions to ask. And so without kind of talking to your friends and trying to read and learn about this stuff, right, you're beholden to the person who's speaking to you. And I tell people a lot of time, trust your gut. I do think that a lot of us ignore that voice inside of us and that little intuition that you're like, something just doesn't feel right. lean into those feelings. I think most of the time we're right when our gut tries to speak up.
Another question. So genetic testing is becoming more common. I have a lot of friends that have gotten tested for BRCA. Hypothetically, we're using a lot of hypotheticals today. If somebody was concerned that they might have a genetic condition, clearly you can't lie when you're signing these forms for disability insurance. Hypothetically, if you were going to get tested, maybe would you delay that until after your policy was in place?
I tell everyone we are all healthy before we go to the doctor. You want to get these policies, both disability and life insurance, before any of that stuff comes out. So if you're thinking about it, don't even talk to your doc about it. Once it's in writing, it's there. So, sometimes I'll talk to someone and they'll say, oh, well, I haven't gotten the genetic testing yet. And I'm like, okay, but did you talk to your doctor about it? Is it going to be in your medical records that it's either been advised or that you have a plan? Because once it's in black and white, the carriers aren't going to do anything until you get those results. And so look, the doctor in me doesn't want people to delay care. But when we're talking about genetic screening, when we're talking about some of the more elective things, you absolutely want to get insurances in place before any of that stuff comes out. It's not like health insurance. These are private commodities, and that information will absolutely be held against you.
Yeah, that's so important for people to think about. What other issues do you see doctors run into?
So there are a couple of big roadblocks that we run into. One is self-prescribing or having friends prescribe your medications. The carriers do not like that. They want to see paper trails. They want to see that you're getting proper care. And so a lot of us, right, we're so busy, you can't see your doctor. You walk in the hallway and you're like, hey, can you call me in my Zoloft, right? And the problem is that behavior can actually get people declined from coverage for disability insurance, in that they think that we're doing something unethical or we're trying to hide something. And I'm not talking about, I'm on call, I have a migraine, can you call me in a quick dose of whatever, right? Or I have a UTI. We're talking about sustained medications, so antidepressants, anxiolytics, narcotics, weight loss drugs, ADHD meds, high-dose steroids, infertility drugs, things where you really should be getting properly cared for. That's a big one. Weight loss drugs, they're huge right now, right? Everyone and their mother is taking one.
Yep.
The insurance carriers don't really know what to do with this data right now. And so some of the companies are automatically just erring on the side of diabetes, which we know is not why a lot of people are using these meds, but they're being treated like they're diabetic, which limits certain offers and pieces of the policy. Some are getting extra cost added because the carriers don't really know the long-term effects of these medications. And so I also tell people, before you're thinking about starting a new medication, right, you should have this stuff in place. BMI is still an issue, and we know that the current BMI chart is based on European, Caucasian men. And a lot of people in medicine right now do not consider themselves Eastern European Caucasian men. And so I've been able to make some headway with underwriters when we look at constitutionality of people, right? And we know that certain groups are constitutionally smaller. They shouldn't be penalized because of their genetics. And so I have been able to make some headway there. Women's health stuff, when I first started doing this, anyone that had a C-section didn't get future pregnancies covered. And I went nuts because I make breech babies. And I was like, I can't walk into a hospital and have a vaginal breech. So why are my future pregnancies not getting covered when I did standard of care treatment? And I'm happy to say that at one point I had all of the carriers willing to change the way they wrote their exclusion language, that they would write, they're not going to cover future complications of repeat C-sections. That's a lot different than saying we're not going to cover future pregnancies. One company swung back in 2023, but then that changes who I recommend if I'm speaking to a woman that's had a C-section, right? So there are certain issues that we run into that are really hard to fight, and there are some that I will continue to fight because I think it's the right thing to do.
I am so glad that you are doing this. I'm just thinking to myself, like, why would I want to even talk to somebody to get this type of insurance unless they were you? Because, like, you have such perspective on all these different landmines and you're advocating for us. So the other question I have is, a lot of us, as we proceed throughout our career, may become less clinical and we're doing more administration. You think about life, like, maybe something physical could happen that I wouldn't want or couldn't work hypothetically in the emergency department, but, God willing, my brain would be okay, but who knows? How do you advise clients on that?
So it really depends on what the non-clinical thing is that they're doing. And interestingly, most of the carriers won't change what your occupational class is as a physician unless you haven't laid hands on someone in about 5 years. So the definition of specialty specific, and I say specialty specific instead of own occupation because different phrases are used, but it actually grows up with you. And so when you become sick or injured and you can't do your job is them looking back 1 to 2 years before you make your claim. And so for some people, you may actually have 2 distinct jobs. And then it becomes, well, what can and can't you do? And what does your treating physician say that you can or can't do? And so I don't advise getting rid of a policy while you still depend on your paycheck, because until you are financially independent, this stuff is really important. And like I said, it grows up with you. So the caveat is always, well, if I got my policy as a surgeon and now I'm not operating and I'm doing real estate, right? Mm-hmm. But they bought the policy as a surgeon. Well, if they're not doing surgery anymore and they're just doing real estate, that's their occupation now, right? Is real estate. And so some of it is just figuring out, when does it make sense to make some changes? And it really comes down to making sure that you're in constant contact with whomever you're working with to really go through and have the conversations. And where does this, intersect?
So that's a great message. So what you're saying is, it's not one and done. I bought this policy and I put it in a drawer and I never need to think about it again until something bad happens.
No, you should be kind of looking into it, if not yearly, every couple of years. It was one of the mistakes I made. I bought it and essentially put it in a drawer and forgot about it, yet my income went up and my bonuses went up, but I didn't increase my insurance because I didn't think about it. And the guy who sold it to me didn't really reach out to me. I might have gotten snail mail that I threw away because we're going back 20 years, but I think now with email and texting and other ways of communicating, there's really no good reason for you not to have an ongoing relationship with anyone who's handling any part of your finances.
As we wind down, is there any other questions you think I should have asked that you'd like to share with the audience?
That's always a tricky, no. I mean, I think, look, at the end of the day, right, every one of us worked really hard to get where we are, and that should be protected, you know, and like I said, there's no time. We're not getting younger. Most of us are not getting healthier. And so you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself.
That is
and
such an important
nice
message.
with each other.
Yeah, and all be nicer to each other. Oh my gosh. So a few of the questions I love to ask as kind of the rapid fire section. What are you most excited about in 2025?
My husband turns 50, and we are going to a 3 Michelin star restaurant to celebrate. And we are both foodies, and it's going to be awesome.
Oh my gosh. Which Michelin star restaurant is it?
It's called the Little Inn at Washington. And
Okay.
it's like
Washington
Virginia, DC. It's like Virginia, DC. And it's this beautiful resort, and you have to stay at the resort to eat in the restaurant. So we're making a very nice weekend out of it. And the other thing is my oldest goes to college, which I don't know if I'm really looking forward to it or dreading it, but it's definitely a big milestone.
Wow, I love those. I'm also a fellow foodie, and my husband and I went to Osteria. I should know the name. You know what I'm talking about, from Chef's Table in Italy this last spring, and it was, just a magical experience.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And I also like to expose the listeners to different conferences, and I know you go to quite a few. What's your recommendation for like not an OB-GYN conference, like a fun conference to just expand your network, expand your thinking?
I do think Women in Medicine was a really good one. I happen to be speaking at WPW in the new year, and which is all about women empowerment and support, right? And kind of building each other up. God, there are so many.
Right. Well, those are two good ones I think the audience should listen to. And we had Chika Jane on the podcast earlier this year. And I just love that conference. I love the Drake. I just love Chicago in September. I have not made it to a WPW yet. And our Women in Emergency Physician retreat is coinciding. It's so hard to find weekends. So we'll be in Costa Rica for AWEP this year. So I'm pretty excited for that.
That's exciting.
Yeah. It's the first time we're trying it out. And we've got the current president of ASEP, Allison Haddock, and the immediate past president, Asia Terry, will be there too. So it's going to be a pretty fun retreat.
I have found that like women in blank have been more fun, dare I say, than some of the mixed conferences that I've been to.
There's just something about that community, right? Mm-hmm. And being able to feel seen and heard, and that people get it.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, how can our listeners connect with you? I'm guessing a few people are probably, I'll joke about like you're listening to this podcast and you're like gripping the steering wheel tighter and tighter because you're like, shit, I knew I needed to take care of this and I didn't. And Stephanie's story is scaring the crap out of me. So how can they reach out?
I don't mean to scare people. So our company is Pearson Rabbits, and PearsonRabbits.com brings you to our company. There's an ebook, there's all sorts of blogs, and you can reach out to us there. I am on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. my name, Stephanie Pearson, or Pearson Ravitz. My office is always open, 610-658-3251. And I'm Stephanie at Pearson Ravitz.
I love it. And I can say your team is very responsive because I got to look under the hood as we prepared for the podcast. So if people reach out, they're going to be taken care of.
And they try to take care of me. So it's nice.
I love
like
it.
Being able, I really like being able to give good people good jobs. That was not something I got to experience as a physician that I'm getting to experience now. And it's pretty neat.
Yeah. The next time you come back on the podcast, I want to talk about your entrepreneurial journey and really talk about that because I love that. You know, one little thing I'll share with the audience is I've had a few people say, Andrea, you know, you're so busy, you're doing so much. How are you doing it? I'm doing it with a team.
Absolutely.
Doing it with a team. And the most transformational thing that has happened just recently, and it's not fully realized, but I'm beginning to see, I hired a virtual assistant and it's life-changing.
Well, I have an in-person.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there, Stephanie, but even the virtual assistant is just like so amazing.
I should have gotten one a long time ago. So kudos to you for thinking ahead and protecting yourself, because for the first few years I didn't, and it would have made my life a lot easier.
Oh my God. And even just in 1 week, I'm like, oh, now that my brain space is freeing up, I could, you know, this is this other thing that I've always wanted to do. And now I'm actually going to have the time to creatively think about it because my brain's not like in email mode all the time.
Right. Exactly. Well, congratulations. It is a big step, and keep doing what you're doing. I love it.
Right back at you. I can't wait to have you back on the podcast and hopefully see you in person at one of these awesome Women in Medicine conferences.
I hope so. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Heartline, conversations with healthcare changemakers following their heartlines. I'd so appreciate it if you could take a quick moment and hit the like button and also the subscribe button that you'll find within your podcast app or platform that you're listening on. It also really helps if you can leave a review. I would certainly appreciate a 5-star review and a few comments about what you liked about this podcast. Don't forget, you can also forward this to people in your network. People love getting new podcasts and changing up what they're listening to. So sending a podcast to a friend or colleague, or even to start a conversation about a change that needs to happen in your organization, is a great way to be a change maker. This podcast represents the views of the host and guests. It does not represent the views of any entity we work for or with. It is also for informational use only and does not replace any professional advice, including medical or psychological. If you are interested in unlocking your true potential, reach out to me. If you're an organization interested in supporting the well-being of your people, I'd love to connect on innovative solutions. Schedule a strategy session at AndreaAustinMD.com. Sound editing services are provided by Better Podcasting Services, and you can find their website at betterpodcastingservices.com. And I'd also like to thank our future Dr. Caitlin Din, who is the production assistant for this podcast.